Most people think they need to earn a high income if they want to retire early, but you don't. The truth is, you already make enough money to retire early, even if you only make minimum wage. And if you make as much money as the average person, then you could retire with over $7 million, even if you never increased your income. My name is Charles, and for the last 3 years, I've been using this YouTube channel to document my journey to financial freedom before I turned 30 years old. And during this time, one of the biggest misconceptions I've seen is that you need to earn a ton of money in order to retire early. And a little while ago, I sent out a survey that asked people how much money they made and whether they felt like they earned enough money in order to retire early. And a lot of people said they did not earn enough money to retire early, even though they were making over $100,000 per year. If you make that much money, you can definitely retire early. So this idea that you don't earn enough money to retire early is holding millions of people back from reaching financial freedom and living a meaningful life, rather than sitting in a windowless cubicle and spending the rest of your life working. So in this video, I'm going to explain the 2 ways to build wealth, how average people could build a $7 million fortune without earning more money, and how anyone could retire early, even if they only made minimum wage. And at the end, I'll give you some super tactical steps that will get you closer to your financial goals, no matter how much money you make. But let's start with the 2 ways to build wealth faster, and why most people are focused on the wrong thing. Building wealth is super simple. Wealth is just the difference between how much money you make and how much money you spend, multiplied by the number of time periods. So if you make $80,000 per year and you spend $50,000 per year, then after 5 years, you end up with about $150,000. Now, this is a big simplification, mostly because it does not take into account investment returns. But I still like this formula because it shows you the 3 different variables that you can control. Now, one option is to just save money over a longer period of time. And this will definitely make you wealthier, and that's why it's so important to start saving money as soon as you can. But if you want to increase your wealth faster, then we have to look at the other 2 variables. And one option is to increase how much money you make. And this is what most people focus on. And don't get me wrong, earning more money is definitely important. You can't save money if you don't make it first. And there was no way I'd be able to reach financial freedom before I turned 30 years old if I didn't have a good income myself. So more money is always going to help. But in this video, I'm going to assume that making more money is just not an option for you. And there might be a number of reasons for that. I've met a lot of people who just don't have the time to grind at a side hustle or pick up another job to earn more money. And I also know a lot of people who choose to be teachers or social workers, which are not the highest paying jobs, just because they wanted to do meaningful work with their lives. So they don't want to learn a high value skill and switch careers just to make more money. But there is another option. Because remember that wealth is just the difference between your income and your expenses multiplied by time. So instead of waiting longer or earning more money, the final option is to decrease your expenses. And this is the strategy that makes it possible to retire early without earning more money. And while this strategy might not be as sexy as starting a $1 million business, this strategy could make you a multi-millionaire just off of a regular job. If you're as obsessed with personal finance as I am, then you've probably at some point heard somebody say that making money is easier than saving money. But I'm not sure that I agree. I know people who could easily save tens of thousands more dollars per year just by making a few small changes. But I don't know that many people who could easily increase their income by tens of thousands of dollars per year. And honestly, you do not need to earn that much money to become incredibly wealthy. The average person in the US earns just about $66,000 per year. And that's just single people. The average couple earns just about double that. Even after taxes, they're left with well over $57,000. So even if you spend $1,500 on rent, $5,000 on transportation, $4,000 on food and healthcare, and then another $1,000 on miscellaneous things, you would still be saving over $25,000 per year. And while some of those numbers might sound really low, the truth is I spent less than that on every single one of those expenses. And chances are you do not live in an area as expensive as the one I do. And here is why that is so important. If you saved just $2,000 per month or $24,000 per year and invested that money in the stock market at a 7% return over the course of your entire 45-year career, you'd have over $7 million at the end of it. So even if you earned an average amount of money, and even if you spent way more money than I do, you could still end up with a multi-million-dollar net worth. But of course, you could also just quit working before you have $7 million. You would be financially free long before that. And this is actually the reason that decreasing your expenses is so much more important than earning a higher and higher income. And to understand why, I need to show you one more basic formula. And I call this the freedom formula. You're financially free once your expenses account for 4% of your net worth. If you flip the equation around, that means you need to save up about 25 times your annual expenses in order to retire. I don't have time to go into detail, but I wrote a whole guide that explains why this works and how to calculate how much money you need to retire early, and I linked that guide in the video description. Either way, the freedom formula shows us something really important. Yes, earning more money will get you to your freedom number faster, but if you decrease your expenses, your freedom number might cost millions less dollars. Understanding this literally changed my life. If you earn an extra $10,000, then you might end up with another $7,000 after taxes. But if you reduce your expenses by $10,000, which is a whole lot easier than most people realize, then not only do you have $10,000 in savings, but you also need $250,000 less dollars to retire. Now, I am not a math whiz, but even I could tell you that $260,000 is a whole lot better than $7,000, especially when it took hard work to earn that $7,000. And this is why financial freedom is not reserved for finance or tech pros. Sure, they might earn a lot of money, but most of them just don't save any of it. But in an earlier example, I explained how an average person earning an average income could live on $32,000 per year. And in that example, they were saving about $2,000 every month. And I showed that that could turn into $7 million after 45 years. But if you only spent $32,000 per year, then you only need $800,000 to be financially free. So instead of working a full career, you could also just work 18 years and then quit your job. And if you wanted the safety of being a millionaire, then just work 2 more years. I don't know about you, but this actually gets me so freaking excited. If you started at 20, you could be financially free and a millionaire before your 40th birthday, even if you only earned an average income and spent a reasonable amount of money. And this is why I make these videos. People think that early retirement is super extreme, but it's actually really doable. But look, you might earn less money than the average person. I mean, 50% of people have to earn less money than average. So I want to show you that early retirement is still possible, even if you only make minimum wage. Now, there's 2 different ways to do this. One is to spend such little money that you're still saving enough money to retire early on minimum wage. This is really hard, but it is possible. And right now, I earn a lot more than minimum wage. But if I did earn minimum wage, I did the math and I figured out that I would still be saving money. And even if I only earned minimum wage for my entire career, I would still be on track to retire. But I definitely wouldn't be on track to retire by 30. But still, living on minimum wage is hard enough, and saving enough money to retire early is really hard. But it's actually still possible to retire early. You just have to move. And let me break this down. Where I live, the recommended annual income for a single person is over $90,000 per year, and it's $227,000 for a family. But in Vietnam, you would only need $11,000 to $17,500 to live just as well. So what that means is that you need about 10 times less money to retire to Vietnam than you do to retire where I live. So instead of needing to save $1,000 per month, you could get away with saving $100 per month. So even if you only earn minimum wage, retiring early is still possible. But at the end of the day, you can only ever retire early if you spend less than you make. You still have to save something. So let's get super tactical, and let me walk you through some of the strategies I personally use to save around 80% of my income. There's really 4 big categories of expenses that I want to talk about. And the first is probably your biggest expense, because if you're like the average person, you probably spend around 30 to 40% of your money just on a place to live. A few people have given me crap for how I save money here, but let me give you a quick story. My senior year of college, I was living in a single house with 14 other people and 2 bathrooms. I can't even tell you how many times I had to unclog the shower drain, and I promise, my hair was not the issue. And in college, if you said that you had a roommate, that meant you shared a bedroom. Only a couple of lucky people had a bedroom to themselves, and even they almost always shared a kitchen and a bathroom with at least one other person. But did living with roommates absolutely ruin my life? Of course not. It was actually really fun. Living with a little community makes life better, not worse. And it's just how everyone lived in college, so I never even thought about it. So when I graduated college, I made what I thought was a very sensible decision and decided to keep living with roommates. But instead of living in a house with 14 other people, I just live in a house with 3 other people. And I have my own bedroom, and I even have my own bathroom, which means my shower drain never gets clogged with hair. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm living the dream. Which is why it's so funny to me when people comment on my YouTube videos saying things like, an adult should not be living with roommates outside of a spouse. Are you a child? Why put yourself through that madness? Now that's extreme. Just 3 years ago, having my own bedroom and my own bathroom would be a huge luxury compared to everybody else I was going to school with. But now it's madness? Here's what I think is madness. The average rent where I live is about $3,000 per month. That is madness. I pay just $900 for rent, which means that one decision saves me over $25,000 per year. That one decision saves me about 2.5 times as much money as the average family does in an entire year. And that means that living with roommates is probably the single best financial decision that I have ever made. And the second best financial decision I ever made is something that is just as controversial. When I show up to work in the morning, I often see a bright orange Corvette. And I happen to know the guy who owns that Corvette, and I happen to know that he is the same age as me, with a very similar job. And I also know that that car, which he bought his first year out of college, costs more than his entire annual income. And even beyond the fact that he's driving a $100,000 car, I can't even imagine what he's paying for insurance to drive a Corvette as a 22-year-old. But meanwhile, I'm still riding this same bike that I moved here with. It's not a very nice bike, but it gets me from point A to point B. So here's the question you've got to ask yourself. Would you rather go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, or would you rather go from $0 to $60,000 in 3 years? And this is the trade-off you have to make. The average person spends about $10,000 on transportation every year, and this guy obviously spends a lot more than that. But I only spend a couple $100. But whenever I talk about biking, there's always a few people in the comments who say,
well, I can't bike. I have to drive to work every day.
And look, I get it. Biking is not for everyone. But I do just want to point out that you get to choose where you live. I didn't choose my apartment and then decide to bike to work. I chose my apartment so that I could bike to work. And even if you can't go completely car-free, just driving less will mean your car will last longer, so it goes longer before you have to buy a new one. Insurance will cost less, you'll have less maintenance repairs, and you'll have to buy less gasoline. So even if you can't stop driving completely, you can still maximize your savings by minimizing how much time you spend on the road. And even if you don't want to live with roommates or drive less, I've still got another option for you. Because the third way to save money is probably the easiest. Regular plain eggs at my grocery store cost about $3 per dozen. Fancier grass-fed eggs cost $7 per dozen. An omelet at a restaurant costs $15. Plain chicken breast costs $3.50 per pound. But salmon costs around $18 per pound. And if you get a nice piece of salmon at a restaurant, you'll probably pay over $30. So it's often possible to get more food for 5 to 10 times less money. And this is why what you spend on food is probably one of your most flexible expenses. And if you eat 3 times per day per year, like the average person, we're talking about over 1,000 opportunities to save money. And I'll leave you with one more saving strategy. So far, I've talked about housing, I've talked about transportation, and I've talked about food. these are probably the 3 big expenses that everyone has, and you can't really get rid of them. But people still spend a ton of money on things that aren't part of these big 3 expenses. Think clothing, think books, think TV, and everything else. So if you really want to save more money, just stop buying the crap that you don't need. And the great thing about this strategy is I actually enjoy it. I don't want a bunch of crap. I actually prefer to have less stuff. But there's one last point that I really want you to understand. I'm a bit of a nerd about all this financial freedom stuff. But the reason I'm able to retire in my 20s is not just because I know how to retire early. At the end of the day, it's pretty simple. I could tell someone everything they need to know in just a couple of hours, and that's what I use this YouTube channel for. So my real superpower is that I have trained my brain to be addicted to saving money. I enjoy saving 80% of my income. And for a lot of people, this is the hard part. Spending less money feels like deprivation. It feels unfun. And fixing this requires more than knowledge. It requires accountability, it requires a plan, and it requires community. And if you do struggle with saving money, I made this video right here to explain some of the strategies I used to train myself to love saving money. I think you'll find it really valuable, so watch that video next.